firstly, thanks for having me. It's actually nice to be able to talk through some of these things. And so my background is, through and through construction. If I go back, way back, sort of started on construction sites at a fairly young age, about 12, 13 years old, laying bricks with my grandfather, and did a lot of other jobs along the way, carpentry, scaffolding, tiling. And it was actually, the time where construction was in a little bit of a different space. There wasn't the pressures that there are today. We're talking sort of, early 90s, so a little bit of a different climate. Obviously realizing that being a labourer for the rest of my life is not something that I really wanted to do. Fast forward till I'm, just left school, started doing a building diploma and was offered an opportunity at Mirvac. So very young, 20 years old, had a lot more hair and a little less weight back then, but I definitely found it very, very exciting opportunity to go into the professional construction environment. However, I realized that there really was, a lot of the elements of construction that I wasn't aware of, and particularly around the efficiency or lack of efficiency in the construction industry. I started at Mirvac very young, and effectively the photocopier was my best mate in that first year. I tell you this story because it just provides a little bit of context for some of the, sort of awareness I have of construction. I've been at Mirvac for 20 years now, having held pretty much all the jobs of my current staff and team, with estimating, supervision, project management, site management. So I've got a real acute awareness of not just the various elements of construction, but a lot of the challenges that exist within the construction industry. Mirvac is a very large organisation, as some people might know. Very large, diversified, publicly listed company, probably one of the largest diversified developers in the country. So I look after the Master Plan Communities division of Mirvac's construction, as we call MPC, and I'll reference MPC a little bit today. But yeah, Mirvac's got a real genuine culture for innovation, very well known for that. And I've been pretty fortunate, to be able to leverage off Mirvac's culture to really try and change the way we do business within the master plan community space.
Yeah, fantastic. And that background you've got, it'd be very unique. I mean, like having your hands dirty, I guess it's very differently when you're trying to innovate, when you really understand and have empathy of the areas you're trying to innovate. So, I mean, in what ways are Mirvac trying to push the boundaries, and what sort of things are kind of broken that need a little bit of fixing or can be improved in the areas that you're working?
Yeah, look, the short answer of that is everywhere. I mean, the reality is there are a lot of disciplines in the business, in what we do. We're probably not, in a space where we would say anything's broken. And that's actually been one of my biggest challenges, even within Mirvac, if I'm being honest. The concept, if it's not broken, don't fix it, was something I got chucked to me quite a bit early days. And I started to request Mirvac's support to do things differently probably 8, 9 years ago, where we probably weren't as interested because the rest of the industry wasn't doing it. No one else was. And I got that. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And my response was, it may not be broken, but if it can be done better, why wouldn't we try? And so realistically, coming from construction, I started with construction. The physical built form and the process and that sort of on-site presence. And there was so much that I felt needed to or could be improved, from the simple concept of how we actually engage with subcontractors, what materials we used and how we build. But I really focused on areas where I felt really had a benefit for the people. Now, what I mean by that is, as someone with, as you use the phrase, empathy, which is a great way to explain it, the empathy I had for my own team and the various different roles, from, the initial sort of project manager that's in that pre-planning phase and having to do everything sort of in an analog way, using two-dimensional sort of, pieces of paper to review, all the way through to, how we procure and the thousands of purchase orders and invoices we have to deal with per, group of homes. to then on site focusing a little bit more on, you know, the risk and stress that is involved in the construction industry. So obviously, you know, I needed to look around the world as to, well, I know Australia is not leading the world in terms of construction innovation. So what are some of the other places in the world doing? And it became very obvious that offsite construction, prefabrication, using prefabricated elements was something that was taking off around the world and had done for a long time. So I started to just explore and investigate a little bit around what could we do in terms of leveraging learnings from the rest of the world. And we really wanted to find a nice balance. I learned very early that we have a culture in this country where change is not easy. We don't really want to change if we don't have to. So I really wanted to focus on making sure that we had a bit of a progressive change towards innovation, not to reinvent the wheel in one go. So we started with what are the most critical areas of construction that create the highest amount of stress and pain point. And I think a lot of people in construction know getting to lock up is one of those biggest stress points. It's the structure, it's being able to deal with the myriad of trades that have to do the risky tasks, i.e. cladding and structure, frame, bricklaying, use of scaffold. So we started working on how do we replace a lot of those kinds of on-site, very labor-intensive, high-risk tasks to, you know, looking at a different opportunity. And so we started working with the industry suppliers and manufacturers, and even one in particular, to see if we could do a lot more in the factory first, particularly in relation to structural walls and floors. So we did a trial first, wanting to make sure that, you know, we didn't jump in head first. So we did a trial about 2013 where I'd had a group of duplexes, two across the road, exactly the same design. We built one using prefab and one doing conventional. We found very quickly that the conventional build had all the conventional problems, and the prefab build was, the first thing we found was about 40% quicker. Now, very straightforward design, and that's where we learned our first lesson about prefab is one of those ones where in a lot of other countries in the world where we're talking a very simplistic design, particularly in the Scandinavian, North American countries where, to be honest with you, their needs for architectural flair aren't as big as what they are in Australia. And so why countries like the Scandinavian countries are doing 70–80% prefab is because they're focused more on performance of the home and the ability to keep comfort because of the climate there. So it's actually quite easy to replicate similar designs, which makes it very easy for prefab. What we learned here is the market's not going to accept that same concept. So we very quickly learned after our first trial that the design needs to be considered very early in order to get the most out of a prefab opportunity. If I fast forward a little bit from that really successful first trial, we then did jump in pretty heavily and sort of jumped to a next project with 60 homes. And I've got to say, those 60 homes is where we probably learned our biggest lessons. These 60 homes were already designed. There was no consideration for prefab in the design, and there was not asked to be. We'd already pre-designed them prior to this decision, and basically tried to reverse engineer the concept of an existing design to a prefab. And absolutely had the challenges, and I like to call them challenges because I do believe you learn the most from challenges in comparison to successes. I don't believe you learn a lot from the successes. So some of those challenges were around the materials we use and making sure that they are actually conducive to prefab, making sure that we understand as well that the logistics of prefab in a construction sense, particularly in the high density world of construction we live in, is a massive factor. And so what we found very, very early was we really do need to consider design way before we're considering prefab. So if I fast forward quite a bit more, we've now done, you know, a few hundred homes in delivering with prefab elements, and predominantly walls and floors, and we're moving into roofs as well. Over the last couple of years, we started moving also into bathroom pods as another opportunity with the same driver. You know, the trade base you need to engage to do the bathroom wet areas, they're not the easiest to deal with. And they do create, obviously, a lot of intensity for the site team. Bathroom pods is nothing really new. The apartments sector has done this for quite some time. But housing, domestic housing, suburban housing is not really used at all in bathroom pods. Remote locations, bathroom pods maybe, but one of the main reasons, again, is just the nature of change and the fact that most project builders don't see the value, because it is actually a little bit more expensive to do prefab if you just look at a front price. And what we learned along this whole journey is that you have to capture really detailed data to prove the benefits, convert those to a meaningful dollar, which honestly we've now learned over a long period, it's actually cheaper to do prefab. It's just something that you really need to appreciate. Of all the categories and disciplines to run a construction company, some are not so obviously dollar related, but as a business sense, very much so reduce the cost of operations. So our journey has been quite long. We're now at a really exciting time embarking onto the next phase of growth. But I think the main point there is we focused on innovating in areas with the biggest pain points. And those biggest pain points, we've now addressed a lot of them. And throughout our chat today, I'd love to sort of share a little bit about how we've addressed all those pain points and been able to recycle that information back to the front end and make it actually far, far more acceptable and even more so wanting for our business to continue to try and, you know, innovate to use more prefab elements.
Yeah. Well, there's so much in there. I mean, there's a few things I'd be interested to drill down a bit further. I mean, one, you mentioned about the costing. I mean, if you go to a traditional QS, I'm sure, and you say, hey, price up prefab compared to traditional, you know, a lot of things that you said don't get captured. I mean, can you explain that a little bit further? And like, what are the things that sort of need to get captured that might get missed for if there's any quantity surveyors sort of listening at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think, as I say, if you just did a cost from a prefab manufacturer versus the cost of conventional construction, I think we'll find more and more that it's more expensive. One, because conventional construction in Australia is still relatively cost effective. What's not factored in there is the not so obvious elements that any quantity surveyor should look at having deductions at the end of their sort of assessment. And a lot of it relates to operational efficiency and project efficiency. Probably one of the biggest ones we're finding as an offset is the prelims. So effectively running the site, overheads, salaries, staff. In Australia, when we're building homes, you know, project builders may give a supervisor 25 or 30 homes in a 25-kilometre radius, and they're expected to look after those. When we've got a controlled environment, when we're actually prefabbing 20 to 30% of the most intense trade base, that actually means that supervision can easily carry a lot more without actually being under the same amount of pressure as if they were to be doing the, you know, similar amount of homes. So for example, if we're utilizing prefab for walls and floors and bathroom pods, there's a significant reduction in the workload for the supervisor, which means they can actually carry a little bit more. That brings the prelim price down of delivery. Then if you start to expand upon that one concept, well, if scaffolding is up, and as we've proven, 40% less, where instead of 10 to 12 weeks, we're getting it down in 4 to 5 weeks, there's a reduction in scaffold hire period, but the overall life of construction is reduced. So all of the amenities higher. There's actually quite a few categories in the prelims section, which is actually a big benefit. That's tangible dollar that you can offset.
Yeah.
Some of the non-tangible is hard to put a dollar, but for a company like Mirvac, we rate this very highly. I wouldn't say every builder would, but reduction in risk. You know, incidents on site, safety on site is a big key, and growing in appreciation for how it can affect your bottom line as a business. If we're reducing some of the most riskiest tasks, if we're getting scaffold down from 12 weeks to 4 weeks, that reduces some of the largest number of incidents in the industry. falls from height and falling objects. If we've got a significant reduction in the personnel needing to come to site, that reduces the risk. And as I say, hard to put a dollar to it, but in a business like ours, we have an incident on site. There's a lot of management, a lot of work, a lot of process to actually deal with those things. And you don't necessarily put a dollar on it, but you can definitely attract a better understanding of its benefit from an operational point of view. Now, I don't want to give all of those little bits and pieces away, but if I can say there are a significant amount of other things that it depends on the business's belief on the importance. I have to mention one of the biggest ones that are a bit of near and dear to my heart, and that's the pressure on staff. You know, our staff, and I've done this, you know, jobs and in the industry for a long time, there's a lot of statistics around mental health and stress in construction is one of the worst out of all industries. The pressures that are associated when a person chooses to leave the construction industry is very, very high. If I would be able to get you to interview a range of my staff, and some of these guys have been in the industry for much longer than me. When I first brought prefab to some of the old school guys, and you know, you can imagine some of the nice, pleasant words that I got in return, not understanding what it meant. Those same guys now do not want to build anything unless it is prefab because they've seen a significant reduction. And what this does is a couple of things. One, it improves the stress, mental health of your team, which actually increases productivity and has a dollar connotation. But the other thing is retainment. Having the ability to not live a monotonous life of doing the same thing over and over again, the amount of staff we have that are just so much more happier coming to work every day because they don't have those, you know, monotonous stresses that they see everywhere else. So that's a big one that I feel has actually got a tough dollar value to put next to it, but it actually means quite a lot for any business.
Yeah, well, it's, yeah, there's so much in that. You did touch on earlier a bit on the design. I mean, your first project was a simple, somewhat simple design, and now for those who just got it audio only, your background on Zoom is, yeah, it looks like there's no compromise in the architecture and it's all beautiful, you know. So tell us about how you sort of, yeah, maintain the architectural intent and the flair, like you said earlier, and also make it conducive to prefab. I mean, are these competing, or they can be both simultaneously achieved?
Look, I would be lying if I said that they're not competing. They're absolutely competing. The reality is there's a classic scenario that the builder wants to build the simplest thing and the architect wants to design the most complex thing. I mean, that's not being disrespectful. I mean, the architect's got a job to do, particularly in a company like Mirvac, where we're known for our brands of the outcome of the product. And 50 years in the business is not because we build, you know, ugly looking things. It's because they're attractive. And so Mirvac being an integrated model where everything's under one house has actually made things really helpful, but also difficult as well. All I can say is that it has to be a compromise, and it has to be something that you deal with the counterparts with respect. And what I mean by that is, I can't just push an agenda of prefab to suit construction's benefit. That's never going to actually work. I have to be able to continually explain the benefits even from the design department. And how we found this balance is I've been able to explain through exact examples, through delivery of these sort of scenarios where you need to be able to keep certain elements consistent, you know, rationalizing certain key elements of the design, and then letting them have their architectural flair for other elements. For example, I use a car automotive industry analogy all the time, and I use particularly Mercedes because I feel like you drive around these days and I cannot count how many different Mercedes types of cars there are. But what Mercedes has done very cleverly, and this is effectively where a lot of this principle comes from, along the Mercedes range, whether it's an A-class $40,000 car or an S-class $400,000 car, there are components that are optimized, rationalized, and standardized throughout the entire range. And they're able to tweak, majority is the facade of the car in order to create the different elements that customers may or may not need / want. And we've just done the same thing. So standardize certain structural elements, wall sizes, heights, types, materials, But at the same time, particularly on a facade, let them have whatever opportunity they need, and I'll work around that. And that's where the compromises come into it, is appreciating that you can't actually have, your cake and eat it too, unless both parties are willing to compromise. And for Mirvac, I think it's actually been, maybe a little bit harder than some of the other businesses, because we are a publicly listed company, and we do, as I say, have most of our sales come through repeat purchases, brands, and the aesthetics is the most important. We've found a mid-range where we can actually have the architects giving as much flair in their facade treatment, whilst also compromising on some of the areas that really don't matter to them, wall heights, bedroom sizes that we know are comfortable for the market, and adjusting them slightly isn't necessarily required, as long as they can have other areas for, use of their architectural skills.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've obviously got a lessons learned, a lot of them over time. I mean, what sort of projects are on the table currently, and what are the current pain points that you're sort of dealing with where you are now?
Look, I think what I just talked about is still a pain point. Customers want for unique and bespoke designs, and I think that's changing. I think when we can start demonstrating some of the other benefits in terms of the performance of the home, and when you're building with prefab, the performance of the home is far increased. And so customers are actually starting to accept and adopt a little bit more of that appreciation, where not everything in the home needs to be unique. And in fact, you can allow the uniqueness in the main things in terms of the look from the facade. You can obviously have a bit of the standardization when it comes to, bathroom widths or lengths and that sort of element. So there's one area there we're still being challenged in this country. The other thing, it's actually, and I like being in these sorts of things, because I kind of welcome and encourage a growth in the actual manufacturing supply chain. It's quite small in Australia. There really aren't a lot of players. And I'm finding a struggle there that some of, our partners, and, I do have to mention, like Timber Trust in Victoria is a company that we've partnered with for many years, really strong relationship. But look, even, their facility, may not be able to cater for the volume that we've got coming up. But at the same time, working with them to try and grow together. We also work with Sync, who do a lot of bathroom pods. Same sort of concept. We know there's a lot more manufacturers in the bathroom pod space, but it's a matter of making sure there's the right partnership. And I use the word partnership a lot, because I think that's one of the other challenges, is making sure that the builder's not putting all the pressure on the manufacturer. The manufacturer is not treating the builder as just that sort of, vendor-builder relationship, and actually developing an opportunity to work together, rather than sort of being the conventional, as I say, subcontractor-based sort of relationship. So, yeah, as I say, the supply chain is probably another one of the big challenges. And probably lastly, it still comes back to change management. The society and the industry's acceptance of something different. I'm still struggling with that in a lot of respects, and trying to even have the change management of the trade base. Instead of the carpenter crew that was just standing frames and carrying tons and tons of material, he's had to rethink the way he does business. And there have been definitely some challenges to try and get the right trade-based partnership to do this a little bit larger scale. And your first point around what's on the cards now, well, after 6-7 years of really doing a range of different sort of smaller groups of homes in various projects, various states, we've just started construction last week on a new project in Sydney, where 180 homes, where every single home will be built using prefab walls, floors, and more than half of the estate will also use bathroom pods as well. So that's probably the largest project using this much prefab that I suppose this country's ever seen. So we're really excited about the fact that 2022, we're probably going to do more prefab than we've done in the past 6 years combined. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And if we've learned that much from the last 6 years, we know we're going to learn a lot more out of this, next couple of years.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you plotted that, it'd be a clear exponential curve. And I mean, the first project you were saying, there was already 40% savings, and as the industry matures, I'm sure, and as the supply chain gets ready, I'm sure that we're nowhere near be potentially? I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And also, yeah, on the supply chain, I mean, you got individual timber suppliers or individual material suppliers. Do you think the opportunity is there for maybe, someone to sort of go to that next level and add that next level of offsite fabrication? So the putting the cladding on and the windows and all that sort of area. So I guess there's two steps there, which some suppliers like Timber Truss are doing both at the same time, but then there's a clear gap on that sort of next level of work to be done.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think, Timber Truss has proven that, you do need manufacturing skills and experience to actually, jump into this space. So I do feel like, other timber and truss manufacturers could jump to this next level. It's obviously, a business investment over time, but it would actually be something that I feel would be the next step. And with so many new materials entering the market in relation to cladding, I do feel like it's not a massive step change. It's, taking the prefab timber wall on a butterfly table and then moving it over to another sort of station where you can start affixing windows and cladding. And I think the other part is just that durability and quality that you can achieve in a factory versus on site. And I think that's where the industry, where customers are expecting a higher quality, is probably going to see that the only way to achieve that is by doing things in the factory a little bit more. Yeah,
great. And there's obviously a lot of new technologies in this space. There's a lot of moving parts. It's fun, but always fun to speculate on these things, where it's heading in, say, 10 years. But where would you say the puck is moving? And if you had to make a few bets?
Look, I do feel that one thing I haven't mentioned, which is probably at the core of all of our learning, is we need to utilize technology a little bit more than we have been up until now. One of those biggest things I talk a lot about is digital engineering. BIM is an absolutely amazing thing. And, someone that's, not grown up with technology, there actually wasn't even, the internet when I was younger. It's even been a bit of a struggle for me to wrap my head around. But after a few years appreciating, if you can get that model strong and with detailed data, the opportunities are phenomenal. So I do feel like the industry is going to utilize BIM far more. 3D is obviously they're already there. It's not new tech, but utilizing 3D is one thing. But then taking it to the next step in 4D, being able to plan and program your job through the model in the virtual environment, make the mistakes in the virtual environment, it's not going to affect anything. 5D and being able to extract all of the data from the model to build your BOQ, run your whole estimating concept, massive opportunities there. Obviously, then the next step is, I do feel like, robotics and automation is definitely a part of the next 10 years. So realistically, COVID's also proven too that we need to start thinking differently. Through the COVID time when there was a lot of restrictions, the only homes out of my entire portfolio that didn't lose times are the ones I was doing prefab, because I needed less people, less intensity. So using technology, partnering with the supply chain, opening up more opportunities for automation and prefabrication. As I say, with probably another element there where AI is definitely going to become a big player as well. We're already starting to utilize a bit of those sort of technologies where with the model, creating a 4D program, then flying a drone over a site and using that artificial intelligence to understand and to learn from our program. So I see that's where it's heading. But to be honest with you, on top of that, yeah, look, 3D printing, robotics on site, there's a lot of things starting to, come into the market. I'd say that some of those things, would definitely be in the 10-year cycle as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so exciting. It's been phenomenal having you on the podcast, David. If people want to find out more about yourself, Mirvac, all the things you're doing, is there anywhere the listeners should go based on this discussion? Yeah, look, I'm always happy to have a chat, and as you could probably see from today, I'm pretty passionate about this because I do feel like it's actually a pretty revolutionary thing within this country. So, if people want to get in touch, I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, you can probably contact me through Mirvac as well, and always happy to have a chat. And just want to thank you for having me on as well. Always love to have a chat about this subject.